I always loved that drive. 2 hours north from my little home in Port Townsend, winding past the pines, watching the lake catch the sun between the trees. It was the kind of spring morning Walter and I used to call perfect. Crisp air, quiet roads, the promise of stillness waiting at the villa. I had packed the night before. Just a small bag. A few books, my tea, the good lotion I only used at the lake. I even brought his old sweater, the green one I still wore when I needed to feel less alone. I got there just after 10:30. The moment I turned off the main road, something felt wrong. There was a silver SUV in the driveway, folding chairs on the porch, a towel hanging on the railing still damp. My stomach clenched before my brain caught up. Then I saw her. Rachel. She stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, holding a glass of lemonade. Her hair was damp. She looked at me like I'd caught her doing something she meant to hide but didn't regret. I hadn't seen that look on her since she was 15. "We weren't expecting you, Mom." I kept my voice steady. "I sent a text Monday. I said I'd be coming up this weekend. It's my usual weekend." Rachel glanced toward the lake. "Ethan's parents just arrived last night. They're staying for a few weeks. They needed the rest." My mind scrambled to make sense of it. Ethan's parents, I hadn't even met them more than twice. They were nice enough. But this was my home. The house Walter and I built from scratch after 30 years of saving. The place we spent every summer and every quiet holiday since the kids left for college. Rachel looked back at me like she was explaining a dinner plan, not a betrayal. "I should have told you sooner. I figured you wouldn't mind. You barely come up here anymore." I didn't answer right away. I was afraid of what I'd say. Instead, I looked at the porch. At the chairs, the cups, the open screen door. It wasn't just that they were using my house. It was the way they stood in it like I didn't exist. I nodded, just once, I understand. She smiled then. Relief. That quick, soft smile she used to give me when she got away with something. I turned back toward the car. The gravel shifted under my shoes. I opened the trunk, looked at my weekend bag. The robe Walter used to tease me about was folded on top. I closed the lid. Inside the car, the air smelled faintly of the lavender sachet I kept in the glove box. I sat for a moment. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. But something inside me bent. Not a snap, just a quiet tilt. In the rearview mirror, Rachel was already looking at her phone. I drove away without looking back. The road curved along the lake trees, casting soft shadows across the windshield. The sun was still beautiful. The water still glittered. But everything felt different. Like I was floating above it all, watching myself leave the one place I still called home. By the time I reached the gas station near the turnoff, it was 11:55. I pulled in, shut off the engine, and sat there. No tears, no calls, just silence. I thought about going back to Port Townsend. I thought about calling Linda. I thought about all the times I said yes when I should have asked why. What do you do when your own daughter looks you in the eye and tells you there's no room left for you in the life you built? That morning I had driven up expecting peace. What I found was a door quietly shut in my face. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized I might not open it again. The call came on a Wednesday morning just after 10. I was folding towels in the laundry room when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Something about the silence on the other end made me brace before I even heard her voice. Rachel sounded composed, distant. She told me the villa was officially going to be Ethan's parents' place now. They needed stability, she said, and I hardly ever used it. She phrased it like a favor, like I was doing something generous by not interfering. I didn't speak for a long moment. She filled the silence with more reasoning. Ethan's mom wasn't well. They'd already moved some things in. It was better this way. Cleaner. Simpler. I think she expected me to argue. But I didn't. I just said I understood and hung up. Afterward, I stood in the laundry room for a long time, my hands still on the same towel. My heart wasn't racing, but something inside me felt hollow, like a light had gone out quietly in a room I hadn't entered in years. Later that day, I found a notebook at the back of a drawer. It had belonged to Walter. He used to jot down garden plans and shopping lists. I sat at the kitchen table and opened to a fresh page. Wrote one sentence. It wasn't just the house they erased me from. It was my place in the story. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about all the ways I had said yes over the years. Tuition, the car down payment, her wedding when she wanted the vineyard venue, and the guest list that kept growing. I paid the florist after her card bounced. I signed the loan so she could finish grad school after changing her major for the 3rd time. I told myself that's what mothers do. We give, and hope it's enough to make our children's lives easier than our own. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person and started becoming a resource. I remembered the look on Rachel's face that day at the villa. Not guilt, not even hesitation, just confidence. The confidence of someone who never questioned whether they had the right to take. The next morning, I called Linda Harper. We hadn't spoken in months, but I knew she'd still pick up. Linda had practiced law for over 30 years before retiring. She was sharp and direct, and one of the few people who'd ever told me when I was being too soft. We met for coffee that afternoon. It was just past 2 when we sat down at the corner table by the window, the one we used to share when we were both young mothers, with babies and strollers and sticky notes in our purses. I didn't cry when I told her what happened. I didn't rant. I just laid out the facts. What Rachel had said, what she had done, and what I had allowed. Linda listened closely, her fingers laced around a mug of peppermint tea. When I finished, she looked at me the way a doctor looks at an X-ray they've seen 100 times. Not surprised, not judgmental, just clear. She told me the deed was still in my name, that what Rachel was doing wasn't legal, just presumptuous. And if I wanted, there were things I could do to protect myself. Quietly, completely within the law. I nodded. I didn't make a decision then. I just thanked her and walked back to my car. At home, I sat at the kitchen table again and wrote a second line in the notebook. Being erased doesn't mean you disappear. It just means it's time to rewrite your part. Something had begun to shift. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Just awake. The kind of wakefulness that comes after a long fog. When you realize the path you've been walking isn't leading anywhere safe. I looked at the clock. It was 3:45 in the afternoon. I had nowhere to be. Nothing demanding my time. But for the first time in years, I felt like my time was mine again. That night, I made soup from scratch. Lit a candle in the dining room even though I was eating alone. And when I went to bed, I placed the notebook on the nightstand beside me. I wasn't sure what I'd write next, but I knew it wouldn't be silence. Not anymore. The plan came together faster than I expected. Linda's nephew Max was in town for a tech conference, and more than eager to help once he heard the story. He didn't ask many questions. Just smiled, pulled out a notepad, and started sketching a system like it was a game he had waited years to play. He called it home automation with a twist. Motion sensors, LED lighting, proximity-triggered audio. Everything timed and layered to create an environment that reacted, not attacked. We spent 2 full days at the villa with Max installing devices so discreet they vanished into the architecture. He showed me how to control it all from my phone. One tap and the entry lights would pulse. Another, and a voice would echo from hidden speakers warning that the home was protected. It wasn't aggressive, just firm, enough to make someone question whether they truly belonged. On Friday afternoon, we mounted a professional sign at the front porch. A dark blue plaque with silver lettering. Property protected by automated monitoring. Authorized access only. Max smiled as he stepped back to admire it. Legal clear and, most importantly, impossible to ignore. I returned home that night feeling steadier than I had in weeks. The quiet in my house no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like space to breathe. I brewed tea, opened my notebook, and wrote one line. Sometimes protection looks like distance. Sometimes it sounds like a voice telling you to leave. The next morning, I opened the security app on my phone at 9 sharp. The lake came into view on the screen, the driveway bathed in early light. At 9:32, Rachel's car pulled in. Ethan followed his parents in the back seat. They stepped out with confident suitcases and folding chairs in hand. They didn't knock. They didn't hesitate. They walked right up to the porch, chatting like it was already theirs. Rachel glanced at the sign but didn't stop. I watched as Ethan pulled out a key, one I had foolishly given her years ago. The moment the door opened, the system came alive. The lights blinked once, then twice, then settled into a soft red pulse. A calm voice echoed through the entryway. This property is protected. Unauthorized access has been detected. Please leave immediately. They froze. Rachel laughed nervously, waving her hand in the air like it was just a quirky glitch. But Ethan's father stepped back. His eyes scanned the ceiling. Then came the second cue. A soft sound of footsteps down a hallway where no one stood. Then a door creaking open, though all doors were closed. Margaret, Ethan's mother, whispered something I couldn't hear. Then the hallway lights strobed. Not bright, just enough to disorient. The voice repeated, "You are not recognized as authorized users. Vacate the premises." Rachel called out, asking if I had hired security. I didn't respond. Through the camera feed, I saw them move deeper into the house. Each step triggered a new sound. A whisper from the kitchen. The hum of a light flicking on behind them. Illusions danced faintly on the living room walls. Shifting shadows cast by projectors hidden in the corners. Margaret screamed. Ethan yelled something about the breaker panel, but Max had prepared for that. Battery backups kept the system humming. By 10:15, all 4 of them were back outside. Rachel was shouting into her phone. Ethan paced. Margaret sat down on the front step, shaking. At 10:30, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. I watched the officer walk through the villa, listening carefully, tapping the wall once with his knuckle. He left 20 minutes later. No report filed. Nothing damaged. No law broken. At 11:15, they all got back into the car. The camera caught Rachel's face as they backed down the driveway. Not angry, just confused. Like the house had said something she wasn't ready to hear. I sat alone in my kitchen phone, still in hand. The feed went dark as the car pulled away. I closed the app, leaned back, and let the silence settle. Not victory, not revenge, just peace, and the memory of walls that remembered who I was, even when my own daughter didn't. I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning just after 9. The woman from the foundation brought tea and wore a navy blazer that reminded me of my old faculty meetings. We sat in my living room while she explained how the deed transfer would work. I'd retain full lifetime usage of the villa. After I passed, it would become part of their network of housing for older women rebuilding their lives. It felt right. Not just generous, but final in a way that gave me peace. I wasn't giving up the house. I was giving it purpose. One that couldn't be twisted or taken. Rachel showed up the next day. She didn't call first. Just pulled into my driveway a little after 3 in the afternoon, eyes sharp, movements tight. I offered her coffee. She declined. We sat at the kitchen table, the one Walter refinished with his own hands the winter after he retired. She didn't yell. Her voice had an edge, but it wasn't raised. She wanted to know why I'd given away the villa, why I hadn't told her, why I hadn't waited. I listened. Then she said it. Not with drama, but like a truth she'd been carrying too long. After Dad died, that place was the only part of him I could still feel. I didn't know how to ask you to share it. Something in me softened just for a moment. I hadn't expected that. Not grief, not fear of losing a house, but fear of losing the feeling of him. I told her gently that I understood. But understanding didn't mean approval. I reminded her that love isn't a free pass to take, that respect is the ground where real connection grows, and without it, even love loses its footing. She sat still for a long time, then nodded once. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't let a single tear fall. There was something there, not apology, not change, but maybe the first sign of seeing things clearly. When she left, she didn't hug me. She didn't slam the door either. Just walked out to her car and drove away. I waited another day before heading back to the villa. The air felt softer as I stepped inside. The lake was quiet, only the sound of water brushing the shore. I moved through each room, unplugging devices, removing speakers, unscrewing sensors from corners. The house no longer needed to defend itself. By evening, I had boxed up the last projector and stashed it in the back closet. The warning sign came down gently, the screws cool between my fingers. I made a cup of tea, then carried it out to the terrace where Walter and I used to sit. The sun was starting to dip. Shadows stretched long across the water. A breeze stirred the edge of the old woven rug beneath my feet. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a phone call. I wasn't worried about what might be taken next. I wasn't clinging to a memory or trying to fix someone else's mess. I was just here. The villa stood around me quiet and full of breath. It remembered. It always had. The way Walter laughed in the doorway. The sound of Rachel's little feet running across the wood floors when she was 6. Even the silence after he died. It all stayed in the walls. But now none of it hurt. I reached into my bag, pulled out the notebook, and opened to a fresh page. Peace isn't something you wait for. It's something you make room for. One hard line at a time. I didn't write anything else. I just sat there, the mug warm in my hand, watching the lake, listening to the house, letting the quiet be mine again.